Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session of the Education-Led Growth Summit. All day, we will be here talking about how companies are using education to drive business impact. And so I'm excited. This session, we'll be talking about certification for business success, best practices, and insights. I'm joined by Maria from Meta. I'm going to introduce her in a moment. We'll get into our conversation. But before we dive in, just a few housekeeping things here. First of all, this webinar is being recorded. So if you want to come back, you want to take notes, you want to share it with other people, you'll get a recording of this webinar in your inbox after the conversation here. The chat box, I see that some of you have already found that. The chat box is open, so please jump in there, say hello, let us know where you're calling in from. At the bottom of your screen, you'll also see a Q&A box. So if you have a question as we're going along, let us know. There are also closed captions at the bottom. So if that's helpful to you, you can turn on those closed captions at the bottom of the screen. Also want to give you the heads up that at the end of this session, you'll get a survey from Zoom. That just helps us to know how are we doing? What do you like? What do you want to hear more about? And then the final thing that I'll let you know about too is that all day as we're going through, we're going to be using that hashtag education-led growth 2025 on LinkedIn. So if you want to join the conversation there, we'd love to hear from you and continue the conversation on LinkedIn. So this is Maria. Maria, if you want to introduce yourself, say hello, and we'll jump into our conversation.
Sounds great. Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Czech, and just to give a little bit of background about myself, I've been at Meta for exactly 5 years this week, actually. I'm an exam program manager. I handle the development and maintenance of many of our certifications. My educational background is in industrial organizational psychology, sometimes referred to as business psychology. And I worked in various areas of assessment and measurement for, I guess, close to 15 years. Right before Meta, I managed certification development at a nonprofit, at a professional association. And there I developed certification exams for individuals in the health information management field. And then before then, I worked at a medical school, establishing and implementing assessment strategy for med students, partnering with faculty on developing their formative and summative assessments. So it was more focused on education. And then prior to that, I was working at a public safety consulting firm, and there I developed, validated, and administered different types of assessments for the purpose of hiring and promoting public safety personnel. So it was mainly police officers and firefighters. And one of the main parts of my role was developing assessment centers, which were like structured life processes for evaluating individuals, which included live interviews and simulated work scenarios, presentations, role plays, and baskets, things like that. So I've had the opportunity to work on different types of, I guess, different diverse projects in the areas of both assessment and measurement across multiple sectors.
That's awesome. And also, I think I've fixed the video, so now you can see Maria talking. Thank you for letting me know about that. So Maria, we've learned a little bit about you. You work now with the Meta Blueprint team. Can you share a little bit about I think we're all probably familiar with Meta. Some of us used to know it as Facebook. And then what is Blueprint, and then what does your team in particular do with Meta?
Yes, absolutely. Let me tell you a little bit about our team. I'm part of the business education team, and we're externally known as the Blueprint team. And Meta's Blueprint team is Meta's central resource for training individuals, training brands, and businesses on current and emerging meta technologies. Our goal is to really strengthen and increase expertise and effectiveness in leveraging our platforms like Facebook, Messenger, Instagram, WhatsApp, to help individuals and businesses achieve business results. So to just give like an overview of the main things that we do, one of the main components is online training and education. So we offer thousands of free online courses, tutorials, different types of learning paths, which are available on our platform. And these courses and learning paths cover foundational all the way to advanced digital marketing skills, product knowledge, kind of best practices for advertising on Meta. The e-learning content that we have is designed to, be very flexible and accessible to really, anyone at any time, anywhere. So that's like one of the main components. The second one is in-person and virtual live training. So our team also offers virtual instructor-led training sessions and interactive workshops. And then the third like main part is certification. So we offer a number of certification exams as well as specialist tracks. And our specialist tracks are specializations that sit on top of a certification. Our certifications validate proficiency, advanced proficiency in digital marketing across our products and platforms. Our certification exams are high stakes, they're proctored, and they're developed with accordance to various psychometric standards and best practices. So earning a Meta certification helps individuals to really, stand out, build credibility, and just grow their careers.
Okay, so we're talking about that big C certification, high stakes, real deal, means something, less certificate of completion. Okay. I know that's always like a thing for people of like, what kind of certification are we talking about here? We're talking about the real deal. So last year we had a chance to talk with Vikas. You're joining us this year. There have been some changes, right, to the certification portfolio. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those changes are? What kind of prompted those changes?
Yes, of course. I guess one of the biggest changes since last year was that over the past year, we have added some skills-based certifications to our portfolio. So this is in addition to our existing role-based certifications. And what we mean by role-based is that the role-based certifications focus on an entire job role or function. So like an example of that would be our certified media planner certification or certified media buyer. So these certifications validate that an individual has the knowledge and skills and abilities required for their particular job role or position. And the skills-based certifications, on the other hand, they focus more on essential like sets of competencies or skills rather than the particular job role. And the certification validates proficiency in skills that are often um, able to be transferred across different roles and different industries. And by focusing on these skills as opposed to only focusing on job titles, we have been aiming to create just a more flexible, more future-proof credentialing system. So this approach allows us to, or allows individuals to show their proficiency in areas that are, high demand, regardless of what job role they're in or their specific job title. And, most of our certifications in our portfolio are still role-based, but we're just adding some of these skill-based certifications just as kind of something additional in our portfolio. And with the rapid changes in the industry and all the things, happening right now, it's kind of hard to predict, right? Like what will be the job titles in the future in a year from now and 2, 3 years from now. But we can have a pretty good idea of what skills will be needed. So we can aim to focus on these essential skills. So that's, that was one, I guess, major change that happened, that we started adding some of these new certifications that focus on skills.
I think I'm hearing that a lot more. And I think we started to see that maybe more in kind of traditional L&D because we don't really know like what is the workforce of the future? What are those job titles going to be? I think even in marketing, we've changed job titles in the last 5 years, and then 5 years from now, who knows like what those marketing job titles will be. So it totally makes sense. And I love that you guys are thinking about those skills-based credentials. Um, and just so folks kind of have some context too, I know we're going to talk about some best practices, considerations, and things like that. Before we jump into that, if we can like zoom out a little bit and talk about why does certification matter, right? Because I think this is a question that comes up a lot is like, why create a certification? What is the point? What value does it have maybe for the user? And I think because of the high stakes certification that you offer, there's a lot more value there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, I guess starting with businesses and professionals first, like the actual individuals getting certified. Meta's certification it's the highest level of accreditation that Meta offers. So it's just a measurable way for people, for companies to show advanced proficiency in using advertising tools. So earning one of our certifications helps individuals to really stand out, to build credibility, grow their careers. And then for businesses, having certified professionals on their teams helps to ensure this like baseline of knowledge, improve marketing campaigns, improve client satisfaction. And then I guess like the next part of it is like why maybe certification matters for, right, for us, for Meta. Um, so maybe I'll go into that a little bit as well. So Meta Blueprint certification, it's a critical program that supports Meta's business goals and ecosystem by kind of growing, cultivating expertise, helping to increase product adoption, building credibility, both internally and externally. And I guess like some key reasons why it's important to us include, first of all, it helps people and agencies and organizations really get to know our products and services so they can use our technologies to help drive business success. And, like I was mentioning, it is the only kind of official measurable way to demonstrate events proficiency with Meta advertising platforms. And getting certified just helps people use our products, our platforms in a better, more efficient way, spend their ad budgets in a smarter way, and grow their business. So it's really kind of a win-win for our partners and for Meta when you are certified as an individual. Clients, managers, trust you more. You feel more confident. It can really open new career opportunities, and you could see better results of at your work with your work. So basically certification just helps people learn, build trust, and it can make a difference for businesses that are using our technologies.
Awesome. So if folks listening, if you've kind of had that question of like, why a certification or why would you invest in like a high stakes certification? There's some things that you can kind of take back to your business. So let's talk a little bit about considerations. We made a slide here. I'm going to see if I can share this slide and then maybe also see us. I don't, I think I'm still figuring out the how we see video. Maybe we'll just do this for now. Okay. Can we see the slide? Friends, let us know in the chat. But just maybe talk us through, Maria, thanks, Blair, some key considerations on when you're creating a certification. What are some things that you need to take into account? Like this isn't, I mean, I think when we were talking through this before today, some of these I just think are good considerations for creating education content in general, right? Like not just a certification, but maybe walk us through this and then folks on the call like think more broadly applicable.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So before we start the process of building a certification, we go through this validation process to really determine if it makes sense to build a new program. And it means like systematically answering questions, to validate the need, the design, the business case, the sponsorship, market readiness, measurement plans, all those things, before a new certification is launched or before the decision is made. And we kind of try to go beyond just like a needs analysis and scoping and focus on the strategic, operational and measurement considerations as well. So there's certain questions that we go through with various key stakeholders and make sure that we're all aligned on these questions, before we make the decision to move forward. And I guess first question, or one of the first questions is, what is the problem here that we're trying to solve, right? Why are we doing this? And is certification really the right answer? So, like for instance, if the problem is like, let's say just lack of education, well, why don't we just build e-learning courses, right? Why do we have to build why does it have to be a certification exam that's, proctored, and why do people have to earn badges? Like what value will that bring? So is certification or is any kind of like education the answer? And what type of, I guess, what type of offering would be the most appropriate? The next thing is really defining and being very clear about our target audience and the size of the target audience. Who are we building this for? Who will benefit from this offering? We have to make sure that it's relevant, it's valuable, and we have to be very clear about defining the audience. And our manager Vikas actually explains this really well by saying that, if it's built for everyone, it's built for no one. And I think it's such a good way of looking at it, because we have to be very clear about who the consumer is. And sometimes it's kind of easy to say, well, like everyone can take this exam and go through the certification process. It could be marketers, it could be creators, it could be small business owners. But if it's like really like such a large audience, it's not going to be really tailored for any particular audience, and it's not going to resonate. So we have to be very clear on who we're building this for. And then just getting very clear about like the type of solution. So again, like certification, or is it training, or is it something else? Maybe it's something different from what we've done before. Sometimes it makes sense to build a credential, and sometimes it doesn't. And then the value proposition, right? So what's the value prop for Meta, for consumers, and for candidates? And by consumers, we mean the organizations or businesses that will be, hiring or benefiting from having certified individuals or candidates on their teams. So what is the value for all those audiences? And I guess the most important consideration out of those three would be the value for the candidate, for the actual credential holder. Because, we really kind of have to think, why would a candidate want to get certified? Like, what value is this going to bring them? There is so much education, and so many different types of credentials, and both certifications and certificates, and different learning paths out there. So why would someone want to spend their time studying and preparing and sitting through a proctored exam? And if candidates can't see value in it, then they're not going to spend time, getting certified. So we always want to focus on defining the value for the customer, the end customer, or the candidate. And if the certification brings value to the candidate, then it's also a win-win for Meta, because then people will be getting certified, and it'll be a successful program. And some of the other questions would be just resources, like what are the resources required to launch and maintain the program. It's a time-consuming, resource-intensive process. So we have to make sure that we have the right people and resources, or figure out a plan of how to make that. How do we make sure to put that on our roadmap, and have the right people and resources? And then really like what are the consequences if we don't launch it? Like, will there be an issue if we don't move forward with it? Obtaining SME resources, and this is a big one. I think like when we first have an idea to launch a new program, there's a lot of excitement, and people want to be involved, and SMEs kind of want to participate. But it doesn't end there. Like a certification, it's this ongoing thing. It's not like you just launch it and then it's out there and you don't do anything else with it. It requires constant maintenance, and we have to keep it relevant and accurate. So it goes through a constant maintenance cycle. So will we have SMEs who are committed to being involved in these maintenance processes for the entire life cycle of the certification, not just when we're launching it, but for the years that it's live? And then measurement is also a key question as well. So what are the KPIs? How will we track these metrics? What's the plan of updating the certification as the needs evolve? And we get a lot of ideas. We get a lot of like proposals for new certifications and new training. And the reality is that we can't build everything, and we can't build everything at the same time. So we have to be very intentional about why we're building it and how this is going to bring value.
Yeah, that's something that's kind of stood out to me about how your team approaches the work to be done is instead of trying to do everything, focusing on where can we make the biggest impact. And so part of that is understanding what are those metrics and KPIs up front, and if we can't define those, maybe we're not ready to create that yet. But I like this final question on the slide here of what are the negative consequences if we don't launch this? Because I think we often will kind of build a business case and say, this is what we expect this to do. And it's all really positive. But sometimes we don't think like what happens if we do nothing, right? So that not just return on investment, ROI, but the COI, the cost of inaction. If we don't do this, what happens? Okay, so these are considerations when we're thinking about starting. And again, folks, like take a screenshot, message me in the chat if you want me to send you this, like a PDF of the slides too, if you want to take these home. Um, what about when we're actually creating a certification? I'll have another slide here. Walk us through, you've been doing this for a while, like what's the process for creating a certification? How does your team go about that? Here's a nice little visual to go with it.
Oh, great. Yeah, thanks for pulling up the slide. So the certification development process, it involves, several structured steps to ensure that, we have quality, we have relevance, we have industry relevance. After conducting all the, scoping work and validating and figuring out whether it makes sense to build a certification, the next, I guess, first step and actually going through with it would be the program design phase, and that's actually here on a slide. So during the program design, typically what we do is we have either a workshop, or actually it might be several different workshops with key SMEs and stakeholders. And during that initial process, we define, we get very clear on the purpose, the target audience, the goals, the non-goals, and then just like the entire architecture of the program, like what should be, should it be an associate level certification? Should it be professional level? We kind of define like all the parameters of the program. And then the next step after that would be the job task analysis. All of the credentials that we build are based on a job task analysis, or I guess we would call it maybe a skills analysis for the skills based credentials, since we're not looking at the entire like job role, but just like the set of skills. But the process that we go through is very similar from just regular job task analysis. So we hold workshops with SMEs during which we identify, we describe, we analyze all the different tasks and duties and responsibilities of a particular job or a role. And then we link what knowledge and skills are required to perform those tasks. And then I guess in the skills analysis, we would focus on defining the competencies or skills that we're interested in. And the job analysis also helps us to determine the amount of real estate that should be taken by each of these knowledge areas or skill areas on the certification exam, and also in the training content. So like how many questions from a particular knowledge area should be included on the exam. And then this helps to ensure that that the decisions that we're making about candidates are, they're valid, and the criteria and the people who pass the exam have the minimum, required criteria or minimum qualifications. They fit, I guess, what we describe as a minimally qualified candidate. And the people who don't pass don't have the minimum qualifications. So the job analysis helps to ensure that the exam is, valid and reliable, and also with the training materials, and make sure that our training materials are adequately addressing any necessary knowledge or skills. So it's kind of serving as the foundation for developing both the exam and the training. And then I guess moving forward. So on the certification side, the next step would be the actual item development or question development process. And then as we're developing exam questions, our instructional design team is working on developing the learning content. But just focusing more on the certification on the exam side, this next step involves developing items or questions. And we begin the process of drafting exam questions with SMEs receive training on the various guidelines and best practices. So there are certain guidelines that we follow to make sure that the questions are well structured and avoid various flaws. Like for instance, some of the most common flaws that we try to avoid are any kind of flaws that are based on, what we call test wiseness or irrelevant difficulty. And, to give some examples, making sure that the distractors or the incorrect answers are, they're wrong, but they're plausible, right? Making sure that options are very focused and specific, using consistent grammar. We, don't use negative lead-in questions since that could increase cognitive load and be confusing. So we always make sure that the questions are asking for the right response, like not for the wrong response. Making sure that the questions are not unnecessarily wrong or complicated. So we go through training and train SMEs on all these best practices. And then we have SMEs, right? Items that match to the blueprint, which was developed based on the job task analysis. And then the items go through multiple review cycles. So when a SME creates an item, it's never just like ready to go. It goes through multiple steps, multiple revisions, multiple eyes. Different SMEs see it and approve it before it is included on an exam. We make sure that it has the appropriate level of difficulty, aligns with the blueprint, all those things. And then at the same time, as we're developing items on a certification end, our instructional design team is developing learning materials that will be supporting the certification and helping with candidate preparation. After item development, the next box there is standard setting. So the standard setting study is something that we do to determine the most appropriate cut score or passing score for the examination. And we normally use the modified Engulf approach, which it involves having SMEs provide a series of ratings based on the perceived difficulty of the exam questions or like how they think a minimally qualified candidate would do on each of the questions. And then SMEs would actually take the exam, they answer all the questions, and then we discuss any kind of discrepancies with the ratings in a workshop. So for example, if we have 8 SMEs and like maybe half of them think that an exam question is very easy and they think that, oh, most candidates should get it right on an exam. And then maybe the other half of SMEs think that it's very hard and hardly anyone would get it right on the exam. We would have just a pretty thorough discussion about that question and ask for people's opinions, like why do they think the item is easy? Why do they think it's hard? And after that, SMEs, may choose to maybe adjust their ratings. Sometimes they'll just keep their ratings, keep their original ratings, which is fine. But we do go through discussions of any discrepancies. And then we compile all those ratings and based on that determine the cut score range and then choose the range within or choose the cut score within that range. So, SMEs to go through this, this process to make sure that the cut score is valid and basically when someone passes the certification, like they actually have the necessary knowledge and skills. We then assemble the exam form. So we form assembly process is next, then release, which is like the publishing process. And then once the exam is actually live, we monitor its performance. And then a few months after we release the exam, we run a detailed health check on the live exam form. And we actually do these health checks several times a year, but at least twice a year. And during the health check, we look into things like, how the individual items are performing and how the exam form overall is performing. So we look at things like, pass rates and reliability, item difficulty, time it takes to answer the question, item correlation. For instance, one thing would be like how are high performers performing on the item versus low performers. And we would flag certain items based on these like parameters, these predetermined parameters. Like for instance, if an item is really hard and people are getting it wrong very often, we would flag it. Or another, I guess, example of why it will be flagged would be if let's say there's an item that a lot of or most of the high performers are struggling with it and getting it wrong, but maybe low performers are getting it right. So that's that doesn't really make sense. There might be something wrong there based on the data. And I guess in that situation, very often what it might be is that the high performers are just reading too much into it, and maybe that's why they're getting it wrong. But maybe that means that the item is written in a way that's kind of not as clear as we thought or confusing and revision is needed. So we would look at all those things and all those flagged items and then review them with SMEs in order to make the necessary revisions. We also look at performances, how performance is by language, by region, by various audiences. And then I guess the next step here would be a job task review. So about a year after the initial job task analysis, we conduct a job task review, which is kind of a abbreviated version of the original job task analysis. So we kind of still go through the same steps, but we're not starting from scratch since the job task analysis already happened. So typically we would review what was already done during the job task analysis. We would look at the blueprint. We would look at what we call the work model expansion, which is like a very detailed version of the blueprint. Or by blueprint, I mean like the list of knowledge and skills covered on the certification. And we would have SMEs review all that information and just make any necessary changes. And sometimes what this means is if there's like a new tool or a new technology that was released and it should be added to the exam, we would, change the blueprint and add those things. Or if something was deprecated and or no longer applies, we would remove it. And SMEs would also go through like the weighing of the exam and figure out whether it still makes sense to have the same number of items come from particular knowledge areas or if that needs to change. So that job task review, happens each year. So it's kind of this like ongoing like circular process that never ends. But yeah, I think this is kind of covering, most of what happens here.
I'm gonna stop sharing here, but I mean, very intensive, right? Like very intensive. And I think that's the thing, right? When we talk about this whole like big C, little c, high stakes, low stakes certification, what do we mean? And this is an example of, if we're gonna invest in a high stakes certification, this is what it takes. Is it's not just like create some content, put an assessment on the end, and like if you pass, you pass. But there's I think something that stood out to me was even like the cut scores, how you're kind of going back and looking at like what does it look like, right? And so you think about I think that's the value for the learner is if you put this on your resume, it actually means something. Like I had to earn that certification. It means that like I proved myself in some way, which some certifications are not that way, which is fine. They don't all have to be that way. So maybe talk to us a little bit about um high stakes versus low stakes. Like what is the role of each? How is Meta Blueprint thinking about each? When would you use one versus the other?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we actually have both types of exams or assessments in our portfolio, but Meta's certification exams are all high stakes. So this means that they undergo this like, rigorous development process. We adhere to established, psychometric guidelines and standards. So like for instance, like one of those guidelines, we're discussing like the standard setting study in order to determine a cut score. So that's something that happens with high stakes exams. For low stakes assessments, typically a standard setting study is not conducted in terms of selecting a passing score. It's usually an administrative decision. So just, you choose 70 or you choose 80 or, another number that kind of makes sense. But high stakes certification and also high stakes certifications they're proctored to ensure fairness and security. exams have a time limit. And this is different from low stakes, which assessments which do not undergo the same rigor during the development process. And usually low stakes assessments are unproctored, they're not securely administered. We do have some low stakes assessments in our portfolio also. And one example would be our specialist tracks. So our specialist tracks yeah, include low stakes assessments, and those are basically additional badges that a candidate can earn, and they sit on top of a certification. So someone has to already have a prerequisite certification to be eligible to earn this additional specialist badge. And then candidates can complete a series of e-learning courses, and then they take a 20-question low stakes, unproctored assessment, and then they can earn this additional badge. And I guess some of the other examples of low stakes assessments, which they're more kind of like formative assessments, they're things like our practice tests, or also our evaluations that we include at the end of e-learning courses. So after an e-learning course, typically there are like 2 to 4 assessment questions just to test a learner's, retention and things that are covered in the course. So I guess, the main difference between our high stakes assessments and low stakes assessments would be that uh, our certifications, which are all, high stakes, they result in this like, tangible, valuable benefit, such as a certification that someone can display on their profile. And we're somewhat in a unique position because I think a lot of other ad certification programs are not high stakes. There's a lot of, or most of them are low stakes. So again, like we have both types of exams in our portfolio, but the certifications are all high stakes. So they are developed, following these various guidelines and rigor, and resulting in someone earning like a valuable credential.
Okay, so we had some questions come in. I want to be sensitive that maybe we can't answer every question. Um, but you mentioned proctoring. Are we able to say who you use to proctor exams?
Yeah, yes. Well, I think that's public information actually. So most of our exams are administered with Pearson VUE, and I think that's actually, yeah, public information. So I think I can I can say.
Okay. All right, so there you go. We got Pearson VUE, which is great. I've actually done a proctored exam through Pearson VUE, which I wrote down. I made the mistake. I wrote down on my hand a question that in the assessment was wrong. Like I don't know, there's a spelling error or something. And they were like, nope, no can do. So it's like really, they really are watching and making sure that you're doing things. Um,
The other kind of thing to note is that we have our proctor team, also like our proctor team as well. So even if we use like another platform for administration, like we use our meta proctors for a large portion of our exams as well.
okay. Um, and then okay, Kristen said, in your opinion, should certifications, and in this case, think low stakes, include one exam or assessment or be a collection of smaller required quizzes? In your experience, do you have like a thought on which way to go?
Should
With a low stakes certification, should you do like one bigger exam at the end or smaller required quizzes along the way? Which I think
I
of
think
like
I
knowledge.
think it kind of depends, like it really um it maybe it might depend on a type of like learning content that's presented. Like sometimes I know that candidates, prefer to have many different smaller quizzes just because it like having assessments really helps with retention of information. But some programs have like just like one assessment at the end. So I think it could really go both ways, and it depends on kind of like what works for the program, and also I guess like what works for the candidate. Like I think different people have different views on what they prefer as well, and how they prefer to study. I guess like sometimes having like a mix of both might be helpful, but yeah, it really depends on a program.
Okay, awesome. Um, and then Annika asked, is it fair to assume that a company that's just starting to build out their learning portfolio, a low stake assessment is more suitable? Maybe that's the question. When do you build a high stake certification? Is that later on in the journey? I feel like some places maybe start there.
Yeah, it seems like it might be a good starting point for certain organizations that kind of, it is a more intensive process to build a high stakes certification. So it's kind of like thinking about all the different resources and all these different questions that we, I guess, went through first when you're going through the validation process and figuring out if it makes sense to build something and figuring out what it should be, you know, making sure you have the resources and the support and the right people to build the high stakes certification and making sure you can kind of keep it and keep it relevant and maintain it. So if that is in place, then it might be it might be worth it to pursue, but it's I think everyone's kind of in a different place in
Yeah.
terms of their program.
I think the answer is always it depends. But especially our last session, we were just talking about personalizing learning with AI. And sometimes I think when you start bigger, there's more content, like source content there to then repurpose. So if you're starting with that high stakes certification, yes, very intensive, but then you could use AI to slice and dice into different smaller learning paths. Okay. One more question here, and then I know we had a question about validity, which is I want to get to. Sarah's curious about your SME team. So what are the roles that are part of that SME group? And I think that's something that comes up a lot is so you mentioned under resources required that there's like SMEs that inform content development, but also getting access to those SMEs because they're going to need to validate questions or help with that cut score, or even look at, okay, high performing people are getting this, low performing people are getting this, like what's going on? We need that ongoing relationship with them. So maybe who are those SMEs, and then how do you secure that ongoing commitment from them?
Mhm. We work with a lot of internal SMEs, and it is always tricky because it's being a SME, it's kind of like this additional, you know, role that they play. So it's something that's on top of their regular, job responsibilities, and it's just something additional. So it's, recruiting and keeping them engaged. It's definitely it's challenging, but there's certain ways that we try to kind of keep them coming back and keep them engaged, whether it's just like recognition. There's like, things that we can do internally to recognize them and write them, thank you letters, and, include their manager, and kind of post like different information about all their contributions that they made, and it helps with their also performance reviews and things like that. So there's certain ways that we, try to like encourage them and thank them and keep them engaged. And maybe even like sometimes something small, like sending them like some swag or something. It's something that kind of like, I think people think it's cool and it's exciting, and they get motivated. So we have internally, I guess, like a SME appreciation program where we, really try to do everything we can to um, make sure that we are thanking people and keeping them engaged, and kind of doing everything we can to to have them come back and work with us. And in terms of like where they come from, it's, depending on a certification, it's different teams. It's depending on who has the right expertise to be able to contribute to that particular program. So it's, like for instance, if we're working on our creative strategy certification, like we need folks who are creative strategists who are like are in those roles and have the right experience, have the right knowledge to be able to to support.
That's awesome. Yeah, Sarah said SME appreciation program in the chat. And I just wrote that down because I was like, this is something we should, I think engaging SMEs can be one of the more difficult parts, right? Because it's like our job is to be the experts in whether it's exams or instructional design or whatever it is, and not necessarily the subject matter expert. And so we need people to fill that gap, but sometimes it's like that's not necessarily part of their job. So how do we call it like winning friends and influencing people? How do we win friends and influencing people? And you can never go wrong, like appreciating people, swag, building relationships, making them look awesome in front of other people. So I love that you're doing that. I know we've got a few other questions, but let's go to this one around validity and reliability, because I know that's a big part of certification. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here, so people could take a screenshot around, maybe talk us through these characteristics of a good exam, right? So one thing maybe you could talk about too is it sounds like you start there, right? Like I think sometimes we create content and then we create exam questions, or at least I've seen this done. But you're starting kind of with that exam, and while they're and thinking like, what is it that we're ultimately going to test people on based on learning objectives exam, and then kind of creating the content there. So maybe talk us through this, and then also how you do that design process there.
Yes, so there are various processes that we follow to ensure that our certification exams are, valid and reliable, and they're measuring what they're supposed to measure. So we do want to make sure that the certifications, are are measuring what we want them to and doing it consistently. And we do this because we want to ensure that certifications have impact, and when someone achieves a certification, that this is proof that they have the necessary knowledge and skills and proficiency and meta advertising tools. So, and also ensuring that it's something valuable for the candidate, and it helps them use our technologies to drive business success. So some of the examples or some of example, I guess, steps would be, first thing would be working with panels of SMEs who are diverse and representative and knowledgeable, and they come from different regions and countries and backgrounds, and have the necessary skills, like have the actual knowledge and background to be able to contribute to these different workshops and processes of building a certification. And then another thing is, in terms of building content validity, is really ensuring that we start everything with a thorough job task analysis. And then, with item development, making sure that we follow the various guidelines on how to construct items that can avoid these various like flaws, and really be like well written. The other thing, using standard setting studies when we set a cut score to make sure that it's valid. And in terms of exam forms, like the other, I guess, example would be we make sure that forms are statistically equated to each other to ensure fairness for candidates. We see different versions, of the exam. So, for instance, if, we have a form released and then we, publish another form, sometimes the new version of the exam might be slightly harder or slightly easier. So then the cut score is adjusted based on that to make sure that that the level of difficulty for the candidate is exactly the same, regardless of what form or version they see, and regardless of when they take the exam, whether it's this year or next year when they'll see a different form. We also analyze the exam and item performance through regular health checks. We look at information like, form, item difficulty, correlation, reliability measures, how the different distractors or the incorrect answers are performing. And, our exams are proctored to maintain integrity and credibility. And, I guess like one other thing to kind of keep in mind is that validity, it's not like a binary state. Like you can't say like this exam is valid and this one is not valid. It's you collect validity evidence through the entire like life cycle of the exam, and then the more like rigorous and comprehensive the evidence, the more confident you could be in the exam's validity. So doing these things such as job analysis, blueprinting, expert reviews, and then after the exam is live, all the like analysis and feedback and all that, that all helps us collect validity evidence for our exams.
Awesome. Yeah, that's I think a good, well, I think I've given you some time to screenshot, and then if folks want the slides, a PDF of the slides, let me know and I'll send those to you. I think I'm gonna pull up the Q&A because Vibu had a question around how you do job task analysis. Do you have, Maria, a preferred method, or maybe you have an article that you would refer people to if they're trying to figure out? Because it sounds like a lot of us are using maybe role or persona based, right? And if we were thinking about how to include that job task analysis, and I think what's really interesting is like I think I see job task analysis often, maybe I'll say more in L&D and less maybe in like customer partner education. But you're using it. And is there a method that you prefer to use there or something that we could maybe link to in the chat?
I guess I could maybe look for something and follow up with you later, but just to kind of explain, like our method is, we would typically assemble just a group of, diverse, knowledgeable SMEs from different parts of the company and different regions, and we go through this like very thorough workshop where, for instance, if we're looking at an exam, a role-based exam, we would, discuss all the different functions and tasks, that the individual performs in their role. And then we would go through with the SMEs all the different skills and knowledge that are required to perform all those different um, job functions, and then based on that develop the blueprint, as a group, and then go through like a weighing exercise where we weigh the importance of each of the different knowledge and skill areas, and then based on that we would know kind of like how many items should come from each area when we're developing the exam. But in terms of like a resource, I'm sure there's different information out there like that describe like these or similar methods, which I'm happy to look at. I don't have offhand, I guess, anything to any like reference materials, but I'm happy to like look, maybe follow up after, and I'm happy to share that at a later time.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to ask this question, and you can also say no comment, but it would not be 2025 if we did not ask, how are you using AI for certification content development? Is your team using that at all, or?
This is a good question. I think it's we're kind of, yeah, I'm not I don't have like a great answer for it. I think there is, in terms of like I guess SMEs using AI to kind of help them like write better questions. I've definitely seen that. We don't use like AI generated like items yet, but I think it's kind of more used as like a tool to kind of like help. Like if a SME is writing a question, they're like, oh, like, how should I like word this better? So I've seen like kind of SMEs like use it for that purpose. Um, and I don't know, I think like everyone's kind of like in a place of still like so many things changing. So this, answer might be different later, but like right now, like I think most of our SMEs kind of use it as like just like a support like tool.
Hmm. That's fair. I think, and we'll be talking a lot about AI today for folks who are going to join us. I'm going to pop a link real quick to the next session in the chat because we're going to up here in a moment. But I think one of the things I've heard with AI, right, like generating assessment questions, and to your point, you mentioned earlier detractors and making sure that it's a good detractor, because sometimes I think we don't want to create the detractors. And so it's like a very obvious, like this is the wrong answer. But I like you mentioned something that's plausible. And Christine, I know Christine's on the call, and we did a great webinar a while ago where she was talking about AI for assessment creation. And then she had a specific prompt for detractors, which I'll dig that up for people who are interested. Um, but then also we heard from Melody at Accenture, she was saying that like AI learning objectives and assessments, it was able to kind of say, hey, you have a learning objective, but you don't have an assessment question that's measuring that learning objective. Or, the content here that isn't answering the question, right? Like I feel like I've done exams at some point in life where you have a question, you're like, I don't know. I mean, maybe I didn't pay the best attention. I feel like I never learned that. And that's where I think AI can be really interesting today, too, with assessments, is helping us to see, like, did we actually create content that supports this question and that where people could answer it? Because sometimes it's like there are questions where it's just a little bit different. I know I've experienced that recently. Um, but okay, that's our questions. This is also kind of our time here. But Maria, thank you for joining us today, sharing your wisdom and experience. I learned a lot. I took a lot of notes. I feel like a follow-up piece of content is coming. And then folks on the call, thank you for joining us. Don't miss our next session. We're going to hear from Grace, who's the Director of CX Operations here at Intellum, about the education-led growth framework. So how do you strategically use education to drive business impact? So thanks for joining, and we will see you in just a few minutes.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.